little panel session about cybersecurity. And digitalization could be a blessing or a curse, but what we see today is that the dark side of the digitalization has become quite obvious for many. The cyber attacks that are striking our actors in Sweden is getting more and more nasty. They are very, very dangerous, and they create a lot of damage. All kind of entities are attacked. We see from reports from the Secret Service that more than 10,000 devices are being hacked or are hacked in Sweden, and more are coming. So the companies are putting up a lot of effort in order to defend, but we also see that the government is upper the level by putting a lot of regulation. So to just get an overview of the whole landscape and also to understand a little more about the threats, the actors, and also what we can do about it, I have invited a little panel which have complementary viewpoints on the subject. We have Magnus from Chalmers, please, Associate Professor. We have Emily, which are Counsel at Setterwalls law firm. Hans Danielsson, Head of Security Service at Combitech. Oskar Arlehamn, Head of Cyber Defense Center at Volvo. Och Rune Bengtsson, founder of the security company Defensify. Please, have a seat here. So, I think we should start kicking off this by putting a question about the reasons for the attacks. Why are actors being, why are people or actors or companies being attacked in Sweden? What are the purpose of the attacks and what is the modus operandi? How are these attacks performed? Maybe Magnus could start.
Yes, it's a very interesting question. So again, you have to remember, I come from a university with that perspective. So I'll start a little bit broadly and then maybe someone else can take on after me. So first, I tend to recommend that you don't generalize the attackers. So we have a range of different types of attackers. They target, their objective is very different. Some might want to steal information, other might want to get money, other may want to target critical infrastructures to cause chaos. And it's really important to remember that you have different sectors, different types of attackers, and all of them have come with different capabilities. Some don't know so much, some know much more. And the problem here that we started to see is that if you go back 30 years, they may have acted much more within their organization, but today you have much more of an underground economy that we're trying to learn about.
Oskar.
And to further expand on that, and it's interesting that you called it like an underground economy. What we have seen, and I'm going to talk about some examples around ransomware and extortion, that these are turning into commercial enterprises, right? Where there are operators, their assets, their products, their suppliers. There's help desks behind these ransomware products, these technical solutions, right? So these are turning into commercial solutions with different levels of sophistications, right? But at the end of the day, there's a large incentive to have some financial benefit from it. And it comes in different shapes or forms. And you started getting into the topic of information. And that's some of the things that we're seeing in ransomware attacks, or that the first thing they do is they go after your data, right? And they might be interested in your data for different reasons, right? You know, for influencing opinion, trade secrets, early earnings releases, or PII, right? Or maybe, and this would then be later leveraged, right? Maybe for sale or a leak out there, right? And they might do this to embarrass you as well, right? Depending on the business you're in. So that's one aspect of it, right? And then the other one is the actual ransom that takes place, the encryption, that I want to demystify a little bit. because we read about it in the press and we've seen it in companies and organizations worldwide. These ransomware operators, and there's been research around this, they're able to encrypt your data, and the analysis that were done, they looked at an asset with 100,000 files or 53 gigabytes of data, that this could be encrypted in on average 42 minutes, where the fastest ransomware strain could do this in 5 minutes. So these things can occur, right? And if they have occurred, a few scenarios can play out, right? That these threat actors might be interested in just disrupting your business and slowing it down, right? And harming you and preventing you from moving forward. Or they want money out of this transaction, right? This is where the ransom comes in. And if you're unfortunate, there will be another scenario where the data will also be posted for sale, and this is where what's referred to in the industry as sort of double extortion. And if these are sophisticated, these threat actors, they know that you want to avoid paying, right? So one of the things they also do, they disable your backup infrastructure. So now your no-pay strategy has been eliminated.
Can we say something about the companies being target? Could you start, Rune?
Defensify is specialized in manufacturing industry. And we can see that the trend today is that the hackers are likely to hack them because there is a lot of money to do. The return on invest is very, very good. So that's a trend. It wasn't a trend 3 years ago.
But it's also quite traditional manufacturing companies that are being attacked, not just the startup.
No, exactly. It's the old one with old manufacturing plants. They have security. The plant can be 30 years old, and it's very tough to protect that.
Hans?
Well, what we see is, and given a bit what Oskar said about this being a business, what we see is it is fairly opportunistic. So for large scale, earn money from selling initial access. So it's interesting to understand that the business is built in several layers, so to speak. So somebody sells the possibility to get access to your network to somebody else who might put a ransomware in there. So based on that, more or less every company is a target. But I think it's also important to understand and look at what you have in your company that might be worth something for somebody, because that will put you maybe more on a target for a targeted attack. So that's another view of it. So understand your position in some kind of a supply chain or ecosystem. You might not be the one holding the vulnerable information, but you might be a way into somebody else. So based on that, more or less everybody is a target.
But I think that more or less it could be that not everybody cares. Emily, from a law point of view, can you put a blind eye to cybersecurity if you're a company, big or small?
Well, no. But I think it's also quite interesting from the lawmakers' perspective that they have actually decided a little bit on which companies are the targets, in that we see many laws coming in now in regards to cybersecurity. And there they have actually decided who should have to adhere to this, or which companies. And it's mainly large or medium-sized companies within several different kinds of sectors. Manufacturing, Rune, you mentioned, but also research organizations. We also see life science, health, transport, and so on, and financial districts. And the interesting thing here is that, well, since it is legal cybersecurity requirements, you can no longer say that you don't care, because there will be either contractual requirements on you as a supplier. So even though you're not large or medium-sized yourself, you might be a supplier. Your customers might actually have to adhere to these requirements, and they are obligated to make sure that you as a supplier follow these legal requirements as well. So we can no longer say that we don't care, because we then risk sanctions, both from authorities, but also contractual sanctions. So it's not possible. And also one thing that I very often hear is that, well, we're really good at cybersecurity at my company. So we don't really have to look at this. And then you'll be like, yeah, and I understand you have an incident management process internal. That's all very good. But do you know that there's many legal requirements on how quick you actually have to report to the authorities? And is your internal procedures, do they actually adhere to those requirements? Because otherwise, you can be as good as you want, but you still risk sanctions.
So if we take a look at the consequences, then how bad can it get? Is it? Oscar mentioned here that the ransomware and you can be attacked or something. Do we have any? Could we give an overview of the consequences? Magnus, would you like to start? What are the problems here? What are we facing if an attack gets successful, so to speak?
I think it's you really have a range, and some of the other might be able to kind of move in for what they see in real life. From university, I have the pleasure of looking at problems and trying to understand the research value in them and how to improve slowly over time strategically. But it can be something that you have some loss to, all the way to you lose your business, depending on what it is and what has happened with the attack. And here you also go back to your first question and the attackers, what really the goals are. Sometimes you're lucky in a way that the attack that affects you is just a side effect, that they might target something else and it just happened to come into your systems. It can still be very difficult for you to fix, but you can do something. In other cases, if you have a very powerful attacker targeting you, it's much, much more difficult to recover.
Rune, do you have any examples from your company where you
Yeah,
have helped clients?
one of the officials, I think you can read the article. It's Mask, and they lost about $200 to $400 million. So it's a lot of money.
From Cyberattacks?
Yes, exactly. The whole article is about the cyber attack at the Mask. So Google Mask and attack. You will find it. So a lot of money. Hans, from your point of view, then you meet a lot of clients. What are the consequences?
Yeah, and we discussed this before, and I think you can look at the consequences from some different perspectives or dimensions. One of them is, of course, the impact it might have on your brand value, stuff like that. Are you going to be able to continue the business? Is this a question about license to operate or something? I don't know if that is correct term, but you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
But then there is also, of course, more or less direct cost. What does it actually cost to recover from the incident in terms of paying companies like ours to support in it or others? So that's also something you need to consider in the perspective of cost. And then, of course, just the simple fact of not being up there operating. If you are in a business where customers can easily choose to go to somebody else, then, of course, it's critical to up. So, I mean, I think it's important to look at this from different perspectives and not just look at the direct costs.
Oscar?
And I wanted to substantiate a little bit on the cost. I mean, the Maersk case was very severe, but there's also research done. Unfortunately, there's not so much available for the Nordic companies, but there are technology consultancy firms that analyze this worldwide. And I think last year, the average cost for a data breach were at $4.88 million US. And this number fluctuates, right, depending on the markets you're operating in and the verticals that you're in, right? So depending on how much legislation is involved, how much external help you need to recover from this, it sort of drives costs a little bit up and down. It's also publicly available information in cost for data breach reports if you want to look it up and dive a little deeper.
Emily, could you add something from a legal point of view here? Do you see like any severe consequences of data breaches, for example?
I think we are actually starting a little bit of a new era here in regards to cybersecurity and legal requirements, because many of the companies today, they are going to, for the first time ever, be registered at authority, which will have some kind of supervision over your cybersecurity measures. And this is, of course, completely new. And there is, of course, a lot of sanctions if you don't adhere to these requirements, including, for example, fines, sanctions, of course, also contractual and so on. But one thing that is also very interesting and is completely new within EU is that we have suddenly, from a legal perspective, decided that cybersecurity is not just an IT question anymore. It's a management question. So you as management or part of a management body at a company will have to actually undergo training in cybersecurity. You will have to approve of the cybersecurity measures. And most interesting, you can be personally liable for breaches. And what that means in some jurisdictions is heavy fines. I think Finland talked about 10 million that you can be personally responsible for. But there's also fines and sanctions for the company. So it is a little bit of a new landscape in that you of course, we have all of these costs that we're talking about here, but you also have the regulatory costs. And therefore, that's why we also talk about the fact that, well, we have 3 different buckets, and one of those are regulatory now, which is completely new.
So we can, to just sum up what you have said here, you say that the attacks comes in many different forms. You say that all kind of companies are being attacked. You say that there are very severe consequences if you're being attacked. So what can we do about it? Where do you start if you want to get into cybersecurity or level up your security? Rune, do you want to start?
Yes, I think you have to start with the risk analysis. You have to know your risks. If you don't know your risk, you don't know what to protect. So that's step 1. Then you have to build some kind of cybersecurity process at your company.
Even if you're a small company?
Yeah, even if you're small. It's more important if you're small, because you're more likely to get wounded in this, because you have not the security as the big ones have. So.
Yeah. Hans, what do you think about it? What could be a good starting point for a company?
Not contradicting the need for risk analysis, but I also think it's extremely important to start with some basic IT hygiene. Since we see things are opportunistic, everybody might not be targeted, but they are a potential target. So just the basics: vulnerability management, patch management, not using passwords. Sorry for being a bit technical, but using 2-factor authentication, stuff like that, to just at least gain some protection. I think that's necessary. So another part of it, and I think that might be something to hand over to you, that is also not just looking at the IT risks, but also the risk based on what you actually do in your business and the information you manage.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, then we can talk about the data risks and all of that kind of stuff. And since EU is a little bit providing an avalanche of legislation, both on the cybersecurity, but also on the data access and also protection and so on. We all know about GDPR. Of course, risk analysis is the first thing. But I think when you said, how should I start? Start now. Like, seriously, you don't have any time to lose. So talk to these kinds of smart tech people and then do a sanity check with a legal person, just to ensure that you have also insured yourself on the third bucket, the regulatory costs.
What do you say, Magnus? What could be a good starting point if you want to get into cybersecurity? If you want to, like Emily say here, if you want to getting started and start now.
So again, I agree with everyone that's already been said. What I maybe can add is that cybersecurity is complex. So sometimes don't just look at the technical aspects. Remember all the people, the staff that's part of your company. So you have the policies and that they understand the policies, that the passwords are important. We do this for a reason. It's not just because you should circumvent it in certain ways, but make sure that you ground everything so everyone in your company understands that this is important. The first steps, authentication, seem so simple, but can be broken so very easily unless everyone is really understanding the purpose there.
But how do you do that? How do you involve everyone in IT and getting their attention on cybersecurity? It's like a safety culture. Is that what you are promoting?
Yes, that's a little bit what I'm promoting. Also to get like different types of competences really speaking together. So you have the technical people making sure that they can explain to different groups in the company, but that everyone considers security as something like very important. Many times it falls to the back of the head. It's something that you have to do. It's something that many people think just have a cost. It's irritating. You need to change that. So it becomes natural. It's something that people understand. Yeah, we do this because otherwise we'll have much more problems.
Oscar, do you have anything to add on this topic?
I'm thinking of the audience that we have here,
yeah.
right? That are maybe early stage, just getting started with things, right? So there are concepts that might be helpful. I don't know if anyone's familiar with sort of threat modeling, sort of connecting to the risk analysis, but in the early architectural stages, in the design stages, look at sort of modeling out the different threats you want to mitigate against. And if you absolutely don't know where to get started, there are industry recognized frameworks. The bigger ones are called like NIST and so forth. There's maybe more consumable ones called CIS-20, critical security controls, that can be derived, and OWASP and so things. So that's a good sort of things to get started and create some structure around these topics, right? Where do I even begin, right? You mentioned authentication, right? That's a whole section in one of these controls, right? Just to give you a fair chance to get started. So, and to your point, Emily, right? You know, the best time to start is now, right? To kind of get it going.
But is it expensive? You mentioned those frameworks. Are they for free, or do you have to sign up for something?
The information is available largely for free, right? So you can. The struggle can sometimes be to interpret it, right? How do we make sense of it, right? And what does this specific, section mean, or this requirement mean, right? And try and balance that, right? Because I think you're all here innovating and trying to do the right things, right? But at the end of the day, you want to build some level of secure product once you hit the market. And in the best time, right? Shift to the left, start as early as you can, and introduce these automation into your pipelines and do when you develop your software.
So it's a quite messy situation, and the landscape is quite threatening. So how did we end up here? What did we do wrong in the past that we can take into the future? If Rune, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think Sweden is a high trust. The whole land is all people in Sweden are high trust people, and we trust everyone, and that's one of the problem, because not every country have that agenda. So you have to be careful, I think, out there.
More suspicious.
More suspicious.
Yeah.
Background checks. Know who you're talking to, etc., etc.
Magnus, what is your take on that? How did we end up here?
We build complex systems, and that is difficult. And I come back to, because when I meet people, security is usually an afterthought, that we're building this product and then we need security. It's never, now we build this secure product. And I think just thinking in trust and where it will be, understanding that it's difficult to take something that you already designed and then put security on afterwards, never works. You have to start early, but then you might not really see the need or are willing to take the cost.
I would also like to answer that a little bit, because I find it interesting that you're both talking about, okay, we're building a really nice and innovative product, and then it could perhaps be safe when I put it on the market. But we need to remember now that many of those customers out there that you want to sell your products to, they are going to demand a safe product. They are not going to be able to buy the products if they're not safe. So again, we can't really not care anymore. This is something that we're all going to have to care about, not only for the alternative costs and so on, but also for legal requirements, and that we're going to have customers that are going to put that down on our throats if we're not.
But Hans, we are a land of engineers in Sweden. Why is it so hard to build a secure system?
Okay, so why is it so hard to build a secure system? I think some of the issues is, as been said, we might not bring all the boring parts in initially. because it's fun to innovate. So we don't want to see those obstacles taking care of regulatory requirements or stuff like that too early. Of course, you could argue some kind of fail fast methodology, but you need to fail on those as well. So I think that's one part of it. Maybe that's one of the major one, but I also think we might somebody overcomplicate things. I don't know if I should move a little bit to this side, but maybe you don't need to be fully compliant with everything. Maybe everything doesn't need to be fully perfect, but you need to start now. You need to implement it from the beginning, and you need to. I think we also need to learn from the history and be a little bit more prepared to actually think a little bit ahead. To actually try to imagine what requirements could come further down when we talk to specific customers, when we're going to go to new market, things like that. Because that's also when we might be more interesting as a company for some of the attackers. If we all of a sudden start to sell our product to defense industry, then of course eyes would open on some places. We will be a more interesting target.
No,
Oscar, sorry.
I wanted to expand a little bit on. Sometimes we can generalize and think about cybersecurity, and sometimes draw parallels to geology, right? And bear with me here, right? Geology is to study, different types of components and stones and things, right? And they find a little crack, right? And then you apply time and you apply pressure, and eventually it gets bigger, right? So I think when you asked what went wrong, right, is that level of thinking that these individuals, they have time. Right, they can do this. So around the clock, whenever you're sleeping, and also sometimes our thinking have been wrong historically. As a defender, and this is a relatively famous quote, right? We're thinking lists, right? We got to do this, check, 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 right? But the attackers, they're thinking graphs, right? They find paths around it, like I jump from here to here to here to here. So there's a little bit of a defensive mindset shift that needs to happen as well to be successful in this.
Emily, sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I was just thinking that I do actually agree with you a little bit. Because this is also going to be very hard to be compliant with all of the requirements. But one of the things is that you're going to have supervisory authorities that are probably going to go knocking on some doors in the future, because we're going to have 7 supervisory authorities, which is just going to go looking at cybersecurity questions. And then it's very good if you have decided, let's not be completely perfectly compliant in these areas, that you document those assessments. We call these EU avalanche legislations paper laws, and why that is because you're going to have to show authorities that you are being compliant in some manner, and that's a lot easier if you have it somewhere on paper.
So keep it on paper. That is a good takeaway from here. Oscar, do you have a takeaway for the audience?
Yeah, I also think about like the resilience aspects. A lot of organizations are very focused on protection, right? But it's also the resilience aspect, right? If something goes wrong, right, how do you recover for this, right? Do you have access to the phone list? Do you know who to call, right? Do you have someone on retainer? Do you have a preferred partner you want to work with, right? And there's also opportunities to sort of do this in simulated exercises, tabletop, right? Really practice your routines. Similar to what you do in business continuity, if anyone has worked with those topics before, right? So practice moves you closer to perfect.
Practice was the tip from Oscar here. Think recovery. Hans.
So much clever being said already, but I think I come back to, I mentioned it earlier about ecosystem and supply chain. Not just adding on more things to what's been said, but just to consider your company's place in this ecosystem or this supply chain. Who might be a risk for you? Who are you dependent on? But on the other way, who is depending on you? So maybe if there isn't, that might not be any contractual requirements yet, but they might come. So try to consider those aspects to be prepared for it.
Be prepared.
Be prepared.
Magnus.
This is dynamic. It's always changing. You raise the bars for attackers. Attackers will react in some ways, maybe by building more sophisticated attacks, but that will cost time and money. But don't be complacent. Don't say, okay, we spent the year, now we are compliant, we don't have to do something more. You always have to kind of keep an eye on this.
Keep moving. Rune, final word.
Okay, it's quite drastic, I think, but if you have some very critical systems, don't connect it to internet.
Thank you so much.